Rachel Bennett was a quiet bookstore clerk with no enemies. Lila Monroe was a sharp paralegal unknowingly marked for revenge. Vincent Cole was a man consumed by rage, blinded by obsession. And when he pulled the trigger, it was Rachel who fell, because, in the dim light of a city street, she looked just enough like the woman he truly wanted dead. Rachel Bennett's day had started like any other. The sun rose gently over Greenville, casting a warm light over the tidy suburban streets. She made her usual cup of coffee, fed her cat Milo, and pulled her shoulder-length brown hair into a loose ponytail before heading off to her shift at Whitley's Books, a small independent bookstore on the edge of downtown. Rachel loved her job. She enjoyed the quiet hum of customers browsing the shelves, the scent of old pages, and the sense of comfort that came with the same predictable routine. She wasn't famous, powerful, or controversial. She was just Rachel, friendly, soft-spoken, and reliable. The day passed without incident. She helped a mother find books for her toddler, restocked a display of autumn bestsellers, and shared a quick lunch with her coworker before returning to the front counter. Nothing about her demeanor suggested stress or fear. She was not running from anything, nor did she appear to be hiding. At 6:45 p.m., she closed the register, gathered her belongings, and waved goodbye to her manager. It was dark by the time she walked across the street to the parking lot. A security camera above the bakery next door caught the last clear image of her alive, walking with her bag slung over one shoulder, her steps steady and unhurried. But she never made it home. By the next morning, panic had set in. Rachel's roommate, who expected her back by 8 p.m. the night before, woke up to find her bed untouched. Calls went unanswered. Her car was not in the driveway. Police were contacted, and a search began. At first, it was treated as a possible disappearance. Maybe she'd had car trouble. Maybe she'd met a friend. But Rachel wasn't the kind of person to vanish. By noon, the reality shifted. A jogger cutting through a wooded shortcut behind a gas station stumbled upon a horrifying sight. There, half concealed in fallen leaves and brush, lay Rachel Bennett. Her bookstore tote bag was nearby, unopened. Her phone was still in her coat pocket. Her wallet was untouched. One bullet had been fired directly into the back of her head. There were no defensive wounds, no signs of a struggle. The crime scene was cold, calculated, and clean. The news stunned the community. Rachel's murder didn't make sense. She had no known enemies, no record of threats, and no involvement in anything dangerous. Her social media was ordinary: pictures of coffee shops, book recommendations, and the occasional birthday wish. Friends describe her as peaceful and kind. She volunteered at the local animal shelter on weekends and regularly visited her grandmother in a nursing home. If someone like Rachel wasn't safe, then who was? Detectives reviewed security footage from around the bookstore. The same dark SUV appeared multiple times that evening, circling the block slowly. It was seen near Rachel's parking spot shortly before she left. The video caught a glimpse of it following her down the road, but the camera lost sight of it after she turned the corner. Attempts to enhance the footage failed to reveal a license plate. It was clear this was not a random accident. Someone had watched her, followed her, and killed her in cold blood. Without taking a single item, police struggled to find a motive. No signs of robbery, assault, or personal vendetta. Rachel's co-workers were questioned, her ex-boyfriends were interviewed, and her digital life was combed through. Nothing pointed to a reason. No angry messages. No suspicious acquaintances. Nothing that could explain why a quiet bookstore employee had been executed in the shadows. As days passed and no arrests were made, unease began to grow in the community. Women changed their routines. Families avoided walking at night. Whispers of a possible serial killer floated through Facebook groups and neighborhood chats. But the police weren't convinced. The execution-style killing didn't feel random. It felt deliberate. Too deliberate. It wasn't messy or chaotic like many crimes of passion. It was precise, planned, almost professional. Even more disturbing, was the discovery that Rachel's keys were still in her pocket. Her car had been found 3 blocks away, untouched. Whoever had followed her hadn't taken the car. They hadn't even tried to hide the body. It was as if they wanted her to be found. As if the message wasn't meant for her, but for someone else. By the end of the week, detectives were back at square one. They had a victim with no enemies, a clean crime scene, and a suspect vehicle that had vanished without a trace. It was the kind of case that haunted officers, the kind that didn't fit into any box. Rachel Bennett didn't live a dangerous life, but danger had found her anyway, and somewhere out there, someone knew exactly why. 10 days after Rachel Bennett's murder, the investigation remained frozen. Detectives followed every lead they had, but each one ended in a dead end. Rachel's phone data revealed nothing more than calls to her mother, texts to coworkers about shift swaps, and a grocery list. For the week, there were no red flags, no warnings, no unknown callers or suspicious messages. Everything pointed to an ordinary young woman whose life was brutally cut short by someone with a reason no one could figure out. But that changed when a woman named Lila Monroe walked into the Greenville Police Department and asked to speak with a detective. Lila lived just 6 blocks away from Rachel. She was 28, worked as a paralegal for a well-known criminal defense attorney, and had seen the news about the killing like everyone else. But what struck her most wasn't the crime, it was the photo. When Rachel's image flashed on the screen, Lila felt an instant chill. The resemblance was eerie. Same hair color, same build, same face shape. Even her posture was similar. It was like looking in a mirror. At first, Lila had brushed it off as coincidence, but the sense of unease kept growing. She started noticing how many of her daily routines matched what she'd read about Rachel. They shopped at the same grocery store, went to the same coffee shop, walked the same streets. It was only when she checked the security footage released by police, the clip of Rachel leaving work, that something clicked. Rachel had taken the same route Lila took every evening from her gym. The path, the timing, even the coat Rachel was wearing, it all felt familiar. Then Lila remembered the notes. They weren't dramatic at first. 2 weeks before Rachel's murder, Lila had found a folded piece of paper on her windshield. Just one word, scribbled in black marker, soon. There was no context, no signature. She thought it was a prank. The next day, another appeared. This one had no words, just a roughly drawn bullet. Lila showed it to her boss, who dismissed it as an overreaction. Maybe someone she helped convict was playing games. In her job, she sometimes handled sensitive information. Threats weren't unheard of, but rarely acted on. But now, with Rachel dead, everything looked different. The notes, the timing, the resemblance. Lila started to wonder if the threat hadn't been for her, but had still played out anyway. Detectives listened carefully as she laid out her story. They had already noticed Rachel's murder didn't follow the pattern of a robbery or random attack. There was planning involved. The victim had been watched. And now, this woman, who looked just like her, claimed she might have been the original target. They began looking into Lila's life. Unlike Rachel, Lila worked in an environment full of legal tension. She'd helped build cases against drug dealers, violent offenders, and men with long histories of retaliation. Most threats sent to her office were empty, just venting from angry clients or families of the accused. But one name stood out, Vincent Cole. Vincent was the brother of a man named Dwayne Kessler, who had recently walked free after being accused of a double homicide. Lila's boss, Marcus Geller, had defended him. Lila had helped organize the evidence that got the charges dropped. After the verdict, Vincent had been seen outside the courthouse, yelling that they would all pay. He had to be escorted away by deputies after trying to confront Geller in the parking lot. Vincent had a record: burglary, illegal weapons, threats. He was unpredictable. Police had never tied him to any violent crimes directly, but everyone who knew him said the same thing. He was dangerous when angry, and his anger never cooled. If he believed Lila was responsible for helping his brother go free, or if he thought her boss had manipulated the system, he might have decided to get even. The theory took shape quickly. Vincent didn't know Lila personally. He'd seen her in court from a distance, but probably didn't know her name until much later. Maybe he followed her, took pictures, learned her habits. But if he only knew her from afar, if he didn't get a good look at her face up close, then mistaking Rachel for her wasn't hard to believe. Especially since Rachel and Lila lived near each other, dressed alike, and moved in the same spaces. At the same times, detectives pulled traffic cam data from the weeks before the murder. The dark SUV seen near Rachel's bookstore had also been spotted idling across the street from Lila's office building 2 days earlier. That same vehicle had passed by Lila's gym 4 times in one evening. The pattern was there. Someone had been watching. But somewhere in the surveillance, the lines had blurred. Rachel's path had overlapped with Lila's. And someone, somewhere, had chosen the wrong woman. With this new angle, the investigation took a sharp turn. Now they weren't looking for Rachel's enemies. They were looking for Lila's. And the most chilling possibility of all was now clear. Rachel Bennett may have died not because of who she was, but because of who someone else thought she was. As the theory gained momentum, detectives turned their focus toward Vincent Cole, the man whose threats outside the courthouse had sparked suspicion. His brother, Dwayne Kessler, had narrowly escaped conviction thanks to a technicality unearthed by defense attorney Marcus Galea. It was Lila Monroe who had helped uncover the flaw, an issue with the chain of evidence. The courtroom had erupted when the verdict was announced. Vincent had shouted curses at Galea and promised consequences. Most people dismissed him as a grieving, bitter brother lashing out. But now, with Rachel Bennett dead and the link to Lila growing stronger, Vincent's words seemed much more sinister. Vincent lived alone on the edge of town in a rented 1-bedroom apartment. He had no stable job, moved often, and rarely used digital devices. He paid for everything in cash and avoided social media. Surveillance showed that his name had never appeared in connection with Rachel, but his vehicle history raised flags. Police found out that just days before the murder, Vincent had visited a small, out-of-town car dealership where he bought a used black SUV with cash and a fake ID. That SUV matched the description seen in the footage near Rachel's workplace. The dealership's records were incomplete, and the fake name used on the paperwork led nowhere. But when police checked neighborhood cameras, they discovered something chilling. The same SUV had been seen parked outside of Lila's apartment complex multiple times in the 2 weeks before Rachel's death. Each time, it arrived around sunset and left late at night. Lila never noticed. She'd come home from work, headed to the gym, or gone to sleep, completely unaware she was being watched. Her routines were consistent, which made her predictable. And predictability is what Vincent had likely relied on. But that predictability was exactly what led to the deadly mistake. One evening, Lila had skipped the gym after a long workday and gone out to dinner with a friend. At the same time, Rachel had walked past that same gym, wearing similar clothes, with her hair tied back just like Lila's often was. Rachel continued her evening unaware that someone may have followed her, believing she was someone else. The chilling thought was hard to shake. Vincent may have never even looked at Rachel's face. All he needed was the silhouette, the timing, and the neighborhood. She fit the mold. That was enough. As police dug deeper into Vincent's recent activity, they discovered that he had a close connection to a woman named MIA Carson, his on and off girlfriend of 5 years. MIA had no criminal record, but neighbors describe her as secretive and guarded. She had recently quit her job and moved in with Vincent, though they never updated any rental paperwork to reflect the change. When detectives visited her last known address, her landlord mentioned she'd left in a rush, taking only a few bags. No forwarding address. No explanation. Police began monitoring Vincent's movements. He was cautious, rarely leaving his apartment, except for late-night trips to gas stations or convenience stores. He walked most places and appeared to avoid using his phone. But the most revealing clue came when a new neighbor reported seeing him burning something behind the apartment complex late at night, just 2 days after Rachel was killed. Investigators combed the small fire pit behind the building and found charred remnants of what looked like paper and fabric. A forensic team recovered enough to identify scraps of synthetic hair and melted plastic, possibly from a cheap disguise or wig. Detectives now believe that Vincent had been preparing. This wasn't a spontaneous act of rage. It had been thought out over days or weeks. He'd followed Lila, learned her movements, acquired a vehicle under a fake identity, and waited for the right moment. When Rachel walked into the crosshairs, she simply fit too closely to ignore, but questions remained. Had Vincent acted alone? If MIA was with him, what role had she played? The breakthrough came from a doorbell camera on a quiet residential street near where the burnt-out SUV was found. The footage showed a man matching Vincent's build parking the vehicle and walking away. In the passenger seat, barely visible, sat a second figure, a woman with long dark hair. When the image was enhanced, detectives were able to isolate enough facial data to run it through recognition software. The match came back, MIA Carson. This shifted the entire investigation. MIA wasn't just a bystander. She'd been in the car. She'd been part of the operation. Whether she helped plan the murder or just knew about it afterward, she was now involved in a homicide investigation. Police obtained a warrant and arrested Vincent at his apartment. He didn't resist, but he said nothing. No outburst. No denial. He simply stared as officers cuffed him. MIA was found at a motel 3 towns over, using a fake name. She was arrested without incident. Inside Vincent's apartment, detectives found what they were dreading, a notebook filled with surveillance. Notes, sketches, schedules, addresses, and a list of names. Lila Monroe's name was circled. A photo of her leaving work was stapled to one page. Rachel Bennett's name was not listed anywhere. She wasn't on the list. She wasn't the target. She was never meant to die. She just looked too much like someone who was. After the arrests, investigators faced the task of piecing together exactly how Rachel Bennett's murder had unfolded. They had strong suspicions, mounting evidence, and a powerful theory, but they needed more than a motive. They needed proof of who had done what, when, and how. The prosecution would need to build an airtight case, especially if this went to trial. That meant combing through digital footprints, timelines, physical evidence, and witness statements. Every detail mattered. The focus turned first to the black SUV Vincent had used. Though it had been found torched and abandoned in a remote alley behind a shut-down textile factory, forensics teams managed to retrieve partial fingerprints from inside the vehicle that matched both Vincent and MIA Carson. In the trunk, under layers of burned fabric, they recovered a casing from a 9mm handgun. It was consistent with the bullet that killed Rachel. It wasn't conclusive on its own, but it added another link in a growing chain of circumstantial evidence. Investigators also retrieved location data from MIA's old phone, which had been discarded but not properly wiped. The GPS logs told a story. Over a span of several days leading up to Rachel's murder, MIA's phone had followed a pattern, circling near Lila Monroe's office, her gym, and even her apartment complex. One route ended just 4 blocks from the bookstore where Rachel worked on the night of the murder. The timestamps showed that the phone, and likely MIA, had been parked nearby for nearly an hour before the crime occurred. The timeline began to solidify. Vincent had spent days staking out Lila. MIA had either been a lookout or an accomplice, possibly both. The surveillance footage, cell tower pings, and neighbor reports all aligned. But the most damning piece of evidence came from inside Vincent's apartment. Alongside the notebook of names, officers discovered a second binder labeled simply, Target. Inside were printed images of Lila taken from different angles. Some appeared to be from courtroom footage, others from outside her workplace, and at least one taken from a distance that clearly showed her walking to her car at night. Beneath each photo were handwritten notes about her routines, arrival times, break times, exits used, and preferred parking spots. The language in the notes suggested something darker than revenge. It wasn't just about anger, it was obsession. The wording hinted at fantasy, precision, and detachment. Lila had become a fixation. Vincent had turned her into an enemy, a symbol of a system he believed had cheated his brother. She wasn't just a paralegal, she was the one who set him free, as one note read. But perhaps the most haunting discovery was a photo of Rachel Bennett, clipped beneath one of Lila's schedule pages. It was taken from a distance and slightly blurry, likely snapped as Rachel left work. The date written beneath was the night of the murder. It had the words "confirm identity" scribbled next to it. That was the moment detectives realized. Rachel had likely been mistaken for Lila, not just in passing, but in a moment of critical decision. Vincent had seen her from a distance and hesitated. The lighting, the angle, the timing, all had lined up. And with that doubt in place, he acted. Meanwhile, MIA Carson remained mostly silent during questioning. Her initial story was weak. She claimed she hadn't known what Vincent planned, that she thought they were just watching someone to scare them. But the evidence quickly unraveled that version. Her phone was present at key moments. She had helped burn the vehicle. She had changed motels 3 times in the week after the murder. When confronted with a notebook, her demeanor shifted. She requested a lawyer. Vincent, on the other hand, never said a word. Not during arrest. Not during booking. Not during interrogation. He sat in silence, showing no visible emotion. It was as if he had already made peace with the outcome. The only time he responded was when officers asked him if he recognized Rachel's name. He blinked once. No words. No expression. Nothing that resembled guilt or even recognition. The case against them grew stronger with each passing day. Forensics, digital trails, and physical surveillance painted a clear narrative. But the tragedy remained the same. Rachel Bennett had died for no reason that made sense to anyone who loved her. She wasn't a part of any court case. She hadn't crossed paths with Vincent or MIA before. She had no clue someone like Vincent even existed. The weight of the case hit hardest during Rachel's funeral. Her parents, friends, and co-workers gathered in quiet disbelief. As detectives continued their work behind the scenes, her community tried to make sense of the senseless. News coverage of the arrest flooded local stations. Rachel's photo was shown side by side with Lila's, with anchors pointing out the eerie resemblance. Public outrage followed. The randomness of her death, the idea that she was chosen not for who she was, but for who she resembled, was almost too cruel to accept. In the weeks that followed, prosecutors prepared for trial with the possibility of seeking life sentences for both Vincent and MIA. Detectives knew the evidence would hold. But no matter how solid the case was, or how satisfying the justice might be, it couldn't undo what had happened. Because in the end, Rachel Bennett wasn't a target. She was just the lookalike. And in a world ruled by vengeance, that had been enough. The trial of Vincent Cole and MIA Carson became one of the most closely followed cases in North Carolina's recent history. Courtrooms were filled with journalists, spectators, and grieving loved ones, all drawn by the tragedy and shock of what had happened to Rachel Bennett. The prosecution laid out their case with quiet precision, methodically tying every piece of evidence to a chilling chain of decisions that began with rage and ended with the death of an innocent woman. The courtroom atmosphere was heavy, not with drama, but with dread, because everyone knew from the start that Rachel had done nothing to deserve her fate. Prosecutors began by establishing motive. Vincent's outburst after the Kessler trial had been witnessed by multiple court officers. He had threatened both Marcus Geller and, by extension, those who worked with him. The binder found in his apartment linked Lila Monroe directly to his growing obsession. It wasn't just anger, it was calculated revenge. Vincent had kept notes for weeks, tracking Lila's movements, cataloguing her habits, and narrowing down the perfect opportunity. But when the moment came, he got it wrong. Rachel Bennett had no connection to the justice system. She never stepped foot in a courtroom, never worked a legal job, and never met Vincent Cole. But the evidence made one thing horrifyingly clear. She had simply appeared in the wrong place, at the wrong time, looking too much like someone Vincent had chosen to destroy. MIA Carson's role, while murkier, became more defined as the trial continued. Text messages recovered from her old phone, despite being partially deleted, revealed that she had knowledge of the surveillance. In one message, she joked about how the girl walked just like the other one, referring to Lila and, likely, Rachel. Another message showed her sending Vincent screenshots from Lila's private social media profile, which she had accessed using a fake account. She wasn't just a passive observer, she had contributed to the plan. She had driven the SUV at least once, and she had been inside it the night it was abandoned and set on fire. A witness, a homeless man who frequently slept near the alley where the SUV was torched, recalled seeing two people emerge from a vehicle the night it was burned. He identified MIA in a lineup. His account matched the timestamp on nearby security footage, placing both Vincent and MIA at the scene. Their attempt to erase evidence had failed. When it came time for the defense, both parties took different approaches. Vincent's lawyer said little. Vincent refused to testify, refused to make statements, and remained almost entirely unresponsive throughout the trial. He stared forward, unmoved by the photographs, the testimony, or the sobs of Rachel's mother as she described the last time she saw her daughter alive. He never offered an explanation, never a denial, never a hint of remorse. MIA's defense team tried a different strategy, painting her as a manipulated woman, dragged into a twisted scheme by a controlling and dangerous man. They argued she didn't pull the trigger, that she hadn't known how far Vincent's rage would go, and that by the time she realized the seriousness of what had happened, it was too late. But her silence after the murder, her use of fake names, and her attempts to destroy evidence all weaken her claims. After weeks of testimony and over 100 exhibits submitted into evidence, the jury deliberated for only 2 days. Vincent Cole was found guilty of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, stalking, and obstruction of justice. He received a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. MIA Carson was found guilty of second-degree murder and conspiracy and was sentenced to 25 years. The courtroom was silent as the sentences were read. Rachel's parents held hands, their expressions hollow. Justice had been served, but justice couldn't bring Rachel back. It couldn't return her laughter to her friends, her presence to her family, or the quiet joy she brought to the customers at the bookstore where she once worked. Her death had come not from a personal conflict or dangerous lifestyle, but from the terrifying randomness of resembling the wrong person. In the months following the trial, Lila Monroe struggled to return to normal life. Though she was never harmed, she carried the unbearable weight of what might have been. Every time she passed Rachel's photo, she saw her own reflection. The guilt was irrational, but impossible to shake. She changed apartments, quit her job, and eventually left Greenville altogether. Her name would always be linked to a murder she had nothing to do with, except for the fact that someone had once mistaken her for another woman. Rachel Bennett's story sparked national conversations about mistaken identity and targeted violence. Documentaries, podcasts, and news specials dissected the case for months. Her family set up a scholarship fund in her name, supporting young women pursuing careers in education and literature. They hoped to honor the life she never got to finish, and still, the tragedy remained. A woman killed not for who she was, but for who someone thought she was. A shadow mistaken for a threat. A smile mistaken for memory. She wasn't the target. She was just the lookalike, but her death reminded everyone that sometimes the most dangerous thing a person can be is in the way.